Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's turn now to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He was in Midland, Texas today, describing an energy policy that he would want to pursue as president if he's elected. And here he is summing it up, and apologies for the bad sound on this, but don't blame us. This is from the DeSantis campaign's live stream, another tech mishap from a candidate that is running on managerial competence.
So we will choose Midland over Moscow. We'll choose the Marcellus over the Mullahs, and we'll choose the Bakken over Beijing. And so we will also choose critical mineral manufacturing in places like Stillwater, Oklahoma, over some random province in China. Our self-imposed handcuffs on oil, gas, and critical mineral extraction will be removed. The days of rolling blackouts and unreliable grids will be finished. To every American outraged by rising gas prices under Biden, and they are rising, and I think nationally it's coming close to $4 a gallon. Our target goal is 2025. We want that gas at $2 a gallon.
Monet, what do you make of this and the one-pager that the DeSantis campaign has put out on energy?
Well, listening to that clip, despite the poor audio quality, I can say that it's music to my ears to hear a presidential candidate talking about the different regions of this country that have incredible gas and oil reserves and saying it's going to be one of the priorities of his administration to help energy companies tap into those and be able to produce them and trade them freely without too much government obstruction. But on the other hand, I do think that if you actually look at the one-pager that the DeSantis campaign released, it doesn't go into a great amount of detail, and it doesn't distinguish itself from, again, what would sort of be the baseline priorities of the Republican Party. So I think DeSantis missed an opportunity here to really come out with something other than a slogan, at least one or two policies that really push beyond the status quo in terms of a productive energy policy. And I think it's interesting, again, to contrast the way that he's conducted his presidential campaign with how he's ran his governorship. He has become an extremely popular and effective governor of Florida because his administration has excelled at taking ready-made, innovative policy ideas, getting them through the legislature and getting them enacted. He has done incredible reforms on things like the wetlands in Florida, on tax policy, on hurricane security and rebuilding after the storms that they've faced. And people see him as a very competent and, in many cases, innovative executive and a COVID response in that as well. But when it comes to his presidential campaign, he seems not to have scoured the country for what are the best ready-made innovative policies that we could implement that are actually going to move the ball forward. And I think particularly of a bill known as H.R. 1. This was something that the House Republicans put together at the beginning of taking over the majority in the House in the current term, that was focused on things like streamlining the permitting process, which is one of the reasons why energy can be very expensive. It takes a long time and getting through a lot of red tape to put new projects in place for drilling and for pipelines. And DeSantis could have very easily endorsed those policies that have already been passed by the House majority, but his emphasis on streamlining didn't even go quite that far. And so it seems as if they're focused more on signaling their commitment to energy, showing Republican Party voters that this is something that they're focused on, but they're not really returning to the best of DeSantis's abilities as an executive by putting something really new on the table that shows people what the practical impact would be of his presidency on this issue.
That's my read as well, or even putting something on the table that gives a sense that you've looked at this closely and know where the levers are that you can pull as president of the United States. I'll pull out a couple bullet points here and just contrast them with a couple other candidates. So one of the bullets from Ron DeSantis is revitalize our nuclear energy industry. And to my eye, that's not a plan, that's a talking point. And I guess it's fair enough that all of these candidates are necessarily somewhat vague in what they intend to do. But Tim Scott's plan, we were just talking about, says he will sprint towards doubling nuclear energy production in 10 years. That at least is a goal. It's something that is measurable. And, you could hold a candidate to account for later on. Another one from Ron DeSantis is streamline the environmental review process for energy and infrastructure projects. And to my mind, that is definitely needed. But again, what is the goal? What is the target? Mike Pence has an energy plan out that spends a whole paragraph on this. He says he will take executive action to fast track approvals, reform the National Environmental Policy Act to cut permitting times in half and get domestic energy online. And again, that is not exactly legislative text either, but at least gives readers and voters some sense of what the target for the Pence administration would be. And I guess I don't understand the apparent reluctance of Ron DeSantis to get more specific on these issues. Let's turn also to Vice President Mike Pence. He gave a big foreign policy speech at the Hudson Institute this week. Listen to this.
China is the greatest strategic and economic threat to the United States of America in the 21st century, and we must meet that threat with American strength. The truth is, Communist China is playing to win by any means necessary.
Kate, what do you think Vice President Pence was trying to accomplish with this speech? And did he put any other policy here for foreign policy on the table?
Well, Kyle, I think Pence deserves credit for a couple things. I think it was his speech at Hudson on Monday was a good articulation of the ideological threat from the Chinese Communist Party. And so he, for instance, borrowed Ronald Reagan's description of the Soviet Union and said China may not be an evil empire, but it's working hard to become one. So I thought he spoke in clear language and tried to get the American public's attention about the threat from the Communist Party, but also, as important, he connected the dots between this threat and some of the world disorder that we're seeing. He talked about how Biden's weak withdrawal from Afghanistan was connected to Putin's decision that he could just walk into Ukraine, and how the Biden administration has been slow to arm Kiev, and also how China, who he's articulated as our biggest strategic rival, is watching what's happening in Ukraine as they look and perhaps plan some kind of hostile attack on Taiwan. So I thought it was good, like I said, for first sees the threat clearly, but also describes how the threat is not just siphoned off in the Western Pacific. It's not something we can't just ignore Ukraine and focus on China. We can't just give up on one part of the world and expect to succeed in another. So I thought it was successful in that sense. Also, too, as important, he laid out a marker, Pence did, saying we need to spend 3.5% of our economy on national defense. This is really important because, first of all, we're spending about 3% of the economy now. It's down from about 6% at the height of the Cold War. And what Pence is proposing is, like he quoted, as a $1.2 trillion Pentagon budget. And that will be considered spectacular and too large. But I mean, the US was spending 4.5% of its economy on national defense as recently as 2011. So it is doable, but it's also important because if, like me, you think what is going on in the world is directly connected with American military power being in decline and not having the assets and combat power we need to deter China or deter Vladimir Putin in Europe. So Pence also laid out, he said he wants to get a 355-ship Navy by the end of the decade. That's really ambitious. The U.S. Navy has been stuck at a 300-ship ceiling since the early 2000s. We don't have the shipyard capacity to ramp up fast. So that's ambitious, but it also matters if you think that China may act by force on Taiwan before 2027. So overall, some will say that nobody will listen to Pence because he has liabilities with the base, but he's laid out here some pretty clear thinking about what may be America's biggest challenge of the decade. And so I think he deserves a lot of credit for it.
Finally, the fourth politician getting into the policy game is former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Her campaign is saying she's going to deliver a major economic speech in New Hampshire on Friday with her plan to save Americans from Bidenomics. And part of that, according to media interviews she's giving, is to end the federal gas tax. Part of the argument there being that electric vehicles cause wear and tear on roads as well, but their drivers are not paying that federal gas tax to keep those roads up. And so, Monet, to end this out, I don't know what change has happened in the past week or two that we're now getting these policy platforms, maybe the coming of the autumn, that nip in the air, get out your horns of plenty and your shellacked gourds and your plans to save the American economy. But I, for one, am glad to see it. I think it makes for a more substantive presidential debate, and we are going to get one of those again next week.
I guess so. I think my theory for why the policy proposals are piling up on top of each other after a summer of very little substance on policy is that the candidates probably think the second debate is a time to really drill down and show voters what they would do in office. The first debate, they probably think I'm going to draw contrasts between myself and other candidates on style, kind of on our core priorities. But they think now that folks know who I am, it's important to actually point towards the future and show what I would do if they take a chance on me and send me to the White House. So that explains that. I think that Nikki Haley, like the other candidates, is not straying too far from established Republican Party priorities. The gas tax has long been a target of conservatives, and with good reason. It's not as narrowly tailored to highway funding as a lot of Democrats would like to suggest. Of course, highways do need to be funded, and so I would hope that Haley's plan does suggest what is going to be done to maintain funding and upkeep, but I think that's a perfectly fine proposal that is likely to win her some support from a lot of Americans who are frustrated with the rising cost of energy.
Thank you, Monet and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.